Assalamu alaikum. Hello, hello. All right, so we can get started now. Now suppose we have some quantum dot or artificial atom in which we have three energy levels, E1, E2 and E3, and there is a single electron that is sitting at the ground level. So it possesses the energy E1, and the system as a whole will have some internal energy associated with this electronic level. Now suppose that a photon comes in, and the photon has a frequency which does not match either of these energy differences. What will happen? Right at the end, what will happen? It won't, it will not. So what will happen to the photon? It will pass straight through. So this photon, whose energy does not match either of these energy differences, cannot be absorbed by the atom, and it will pass straight through, and the atom is said to be transparent to the photon. Now suppose this particular photon has an energy E3 minus E2. Will it be absorbed by the atom? No, it will not be absorbed by the atom. However, if the electron were originally sitting in E2, alright, let me draw another diagram. In this second case, the electron is sitting in the energy level E2, and you turn on a laser light at time t dash, the atom has been excited to the energy level E2. You turn on the laser at time t dash, and the frequency of the laser is E2 minus E1 over H, which means that the laser is tuned to this energy difference. Now what will happen at time less than t dash? Before the laser has been switched on, the electron has been excited to the level E2 at some prior time. The electron can jump down, it will fall down, and it will emit a photon with a certain frequency which will be given by E2 minus E1 over H. How long will it stay in E2? How long on average does an electron stay in an excited state? We don't know. But on average, electrons stay in excited states for about nanoseconds, generally. So every excited state has what is called a lifetime. So an electron that has been excited to an excited state will live there on average for a certain amount of time, which is roughly of the order of a nanosecond, before which it will decay. Now suppose the electron is still in the excited state and we have time greater than t dash. The electron has not yet come down, it has not yet emitted a photon, and an incoming photon comes in whose frequency is tuned to E2 minus E1. What will happen? Nothing will happen. The transition will not take place, correct? Alright, let me repeat what's going on. We have three energy levels. An electron is in the lower state. A photon comes in which has an energy equal to E2 minus E1. This is E2, this is E1, this is E3. This electron will be excited to the first excited state, correct? If it sees a photon of the correct frequency. If this frequency does not match this energy gap, the photon will go straight through. However, if this process occurs, it is called absorption. Likewise, the other process in which the electron has already been excited and you wait there for long enough on our scale means of the order of nanoseconds, then this electron will tend to come down to the ground state and the energy difference will be emitted as a photon of energy E2 minus E1. Alright? So this is called emission. In fact, it's given a special name, spontaneous emission. Do you know the meaning of spontaneous? As khud se ho jati.
सर अगर एनर्जी E2 माइनस E1 से कम है तो
किस केस में? इस केस में?
इस केस में जिसमें in which the electron is in its ground state, if it is less than E2 minus E1, would it rise to a certain level below E2 and then fall back, or would it stay?
There is no level below E2.
I know. As in, would it float for some time and then go back, or would it stay there?
So when we draw this diagram, do you understand the question? When we draw this diagram, what is the vertical scale representing? It's representing energy. So this is not space. So the electron does not float anywhere. An electron is at this level, it means it possesses this energy E1. An electron at this level, it means it possesses this energy E2. An electron here possesses the energy E3. An electron can only possess either an energy E1 or E2 or E3. It cannot have an energy value in between because there are no energy levels that are in this gap.
If the photon's energy is not enough to take the electron to the next level, then would the energy of the photon turn into the thermal energy of the atom?
No, it won't. So it won't. It will increase the thermal energy in other ways, and we're going to deal with that. That is called black body radiation, but we're going to deal with that later. It has not. If this photon does not have the correct energy, it will pass straight through. It will not be absorbed by the atom.
What if the energy provided the electron is somewhere between E3 and E2? What will happen there?
It's somewhere between E3 and E2. I mean, what do you mean?
The energy of the photon that's incoming, it excites it to, it has enough energy to take the electron.
Somewhere here?
Yeah.
Alright, that's a good question. If the energy of this photon is greater than E2 minus E1, right? So this is the energy of the photon. It's greater than E2 minus E1, but it's smaller than E3 minus E1. That's your question, right? So what will happen? Nothing will happen. Because this photon is a particle which cannot be which can only be destroyed. cannot share its energy with anything else. It cannot split up into two particles, and one particle providing the enough energy for this electron to be excited to E2 and the other remainder energy going unobstructed. So this is a very good question. This energy, if the energy is in this range, that is, there is sufficient energy to possibly excite the electron to somewhere here, still the electron will not be excited because there is no energy level that is available for the electron to make a transition.
Will it at least move to E2 then?
It will not move to E2 either, because where will the remainder of the energy go? Right? So if an electron strikes an atom or an I'll answer this question after I give you the third example, right? आपको मेरी आवाज ठीक आ रही है ना पीछे तक? Suppose the electron is in the state E2. And a photon comes in that has the energy E2 minus E1. So the electron is already in the excited state, and a photon is impinging the atom such that the energy of the photon is equal to this gap. What's going to happen? Nothing.
So any electron that will be jumping back will jump backwards.
But there is no electron jumping down. The electron is sitting here.
So there is just one electron in the system.
Yeah, there is only one electron in the system. How can it jump up? Because this photon does not have the correct energy so that the electron makes this jump.
So it has more energy.
No, it can't. The electron will fall to the lower energy, and then what? Alright, so you're almost correct. What will happen in this case? Before 1935 there were only these two cases. That is a case of absorption and a case of spontaneous emission. That is, an electron that has been excited will come back to the ground state and a photon will be emitted. Here an electron is in the lower state, a photon is absorbed, it's promoted to a higher level. Now in this case, if an electron is already excited and a photon comes in, a third process was conjectured or was presented by Einstein, and this is the process called stimulated emission. In stimulated emission, this electron will actually be coming down. It will jump from the higher level to the lower level. This downward transition is stimulated. It is triggered by this incident photon, and now we have to conserve energy. The internal energy of this atom is going down, right, because the electron is jumping from a higher state to a lower state, so it must emit a photon with energy E2 minus E1, and this photon will pass straight through. After doing the business of stimulating the emission of one photon, it will pass straight through. So you input one photon of the correct energy and two photons come out. One is the original photon and the second is a photon whose emission has been triggered by the incoming photon. So from one photon you get two photons. This is the process of stimulated emission. And the wonderful thing that is happening here is that these two photons are actually moving in the same direction and they are in phase. So they are totally coherent. And this third process is essential for the operation of lasers. Laser, the word laser means laser amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. So there are three processes which can happen when an electron inside an atom or an artificial atom or a quantum dot sees an incoming photon. What was the question?
I'm saying when this incident photon what is the interaction that it does with the atom that causes this to trigger them at the same time such that they are in phase with each other?
What kind of interaction takes place?
How does this thing ensure that both of these photons will be in phase? Because if there is even a slight time difference between them, they will be out of phase, somewhere different, right?
Right. So the exact mechanism comes through quantum electrodynamics. That is beyond the scope of this course. But what is really happening is that this process is instantaneous. As soon as the photon comes in and interacts with this system, another photon is emitted, and the two photons have a wave that are exactly in phase. They are totally synchronous. So there could be a delay, but the phase could actually match itself. If you have two sine waves, one of these waves could be delayed such that the delayed wave still has the same phase as the incoming photon. And this is described by a combination of thermodynamics, statistical mechanics and quantum electrodynamics. In fact, it is believed that spontaneous emission is in fact stimulated emission in disguise. There are some invisible photons that are hitting this system which are actually causing the emission of photons, and those invisible photons are coming from vacuum. So, but this is beyond the scope of this course.
Sir, I'm sorry, I don't get what's the point of the electron falling down because of the incoming photon, because the electron would have fallen down anyway after some nanoseconds, right?
Right. So the difference between spontaneous emission and stimulated emission is that here also the photon falls down because after a certain lifetime, say of the order of nanoseconds, here the electron is also coming down and emitting a photon. The point of all of this is that these two photons have the same phase. Now if you have a neighboring atom, in which an electron is sitting in the level E2, one photon comes in, it produces two photons, and there are two neighboring atoms in fact. Then this one photon can stimulate the emission of two photons, and this one photon can stimulate the emission of two photons. Since both of these are in phase, both of these will be in phase, and these two photons will be in phase with these photons. So you have an avalanche of photons. So from one photon you're getting two which are in phase, from two you're getting four that are in phase, from four you're getting eight that are in phase. So you have an avalanche, a snowball effect of coherent photons, a large number of photons that are in phase. And this is how a laser works actually. And all of these photons are in phase, they are moving in the same direction. You can get a very intense beam. And about lifetimes, lasers only work when the excited states have slightly longer lifetimes than average excited states, so that they can stay in the excited state for somewhat longer. Excuse me, yaar. Want to go out of the classroom? Want to go out of the classroom?
So I came late, so I was off.
And please keep quiet. So the question I would like to ask you the average lifetime of an excited state is of the order of nanoseconds. But for a laser to work, what would you like? Would you like this excited state to be longer lived or shorter lived? Why? More energetic?
So that it can remain in the excited state for longer.
Then
the photon will come and stimulate an emission.
exactly. You want these excited states to have a longer lifetime, because stimulated emission only occurs when an excited state is populated. So if the excited states are rapidly decaying to the ground state, simple absorption will take place. But what you would like is, you would like this effect to predominate. You would like stimulated emission to predominate. And that is possible only if there are enough electrons in the excited states, which means that this excited state should be slightly longer lived, so that enough excited states are populated that coherent photons are emitted and an intense laser beam is achieved. So actually you've seen the working of a laser. You would need stimulated emission to predominate, and you would need these states to be slightly longer lived. These are called metastable states.
I did not get this part.
Which one?
That is two photons striking the two different.
So there is stimulated emission that's taking place. Say one photon comes in, two photons are emitted, and there are neighboring atoms. There is a gas and there is a neighboring atoms. So this photon sees another atom in which the electron is already in an excited state. So this photon will stimulate the emission of two photons.
So excuse me, can the second photon strike the same one again?
No, it cannot, because this photon has done its business. It's already done its business. Now this photon passes through the atom or sees another atom and stimulates the emission of these two photons. So from 2 you're getting 4. G.
How is momentum conserved in this particular case?
So momentum is always conserved. If you have spontaneous emission, that's a very good question. It's a very intelligent question answer session that's going on. If you have this case of spontaneous emission, does this emitted photon carry some momentum? What is its momentum? mc or hf over c. And what's the direction of this momentum? The momentum is pointing in this direction. So the atom as a whole will get a kick in the backward direction. The emitter from which the photons are emanating must move in the backward direction. So they get a momentum in the backward direction. But since the atom as a whole is a very massive object, its velocity is very small. So the kickback is very small. So momentum has to be conserved in all processes, linear as well as angular. Energy has to be conserved in all processes. So for laser we have two requirements. We have the requirement of stimulated emission predominating, and we have the requirement of metastable states. Okay, let's make a recourse to the harmonic oscillator again. And be very attentive, because this is going to be an intense half an hour now. So we've seen the potential energy curve for a harmonic oscillator. This is some R. This axis, let's call it energy. And the potential energy curve looks like this. for a harmonic oscillator. We all know this. This potential energy curve, I represent this by U. UR is, if you would like to call it X for your pleasure, let's call it X. U of X is half kx squared. Alright, you all agree with me on that. And the differential equation for this harmonic oscillator is m d square x by dt square plus kx equals 0, or we could write d square x by dt square plus k over m, x is 0, and you should be able to solve this equation. I could ask you the solution of this equation and the complete procedure. And this term k over m, what are the dimensions of k over m? Please work out the dimensions at the back. I'll ask from the back. Okay. आवाज ठीक आ रही है लेकिन माइक नहीं चल रहा है। वैसे आवाज ठीक आ रही है। Anyone? So it's 1 over time squared. So we can call this omega naught squared. It's an angular frequency. So the differential equation is d square x dt squared plus omega naught squared is x is 0. So you solve this equation, you get x, you can find the potential energy. Now as I've already remarked, this potential energy curve could go anywhere. It could be displaced about the origin in the vertical direction. It doesn't matter. It could be here, it could be here, and so on. But let's stick to the yellow curve. Now what I would like to ask you is classically, what values of energy for the oscillator are possible? There's a mass attached to the spring. Classically, what energy would the oscillator could the oscillator have? Please raise your hands. Right. So could you draw the possible energy values on the curve? Right. So all of these values of energy are possible. So you could have all of these energies. There's really no restriction on what the energy could be. Because if you see, this x is given by some a cosine omega t plus perhaps a phase. Now this omega naught is fixed by the spring constant and the mass. So this omega naught is fixed, and the energy is proportional to the square of x. So the energy is proportional to a squared. So what does it mean when we say that the energy, and what's the total energy equal to? What's the total energy of the oscillator? Half k a squared. This is the total energy, which is the sum of a potential energy and a kinetic energy. So if all values of E are possible, what does it mean? It really means that all values of A are possible. So A can have any value, the amplitude can take up any value. So this is what the classical result is, and this is what a classical harmonic oscillator really is. But let's turn to the quantum version of this harmonic oscillator, and we know that energies are quantized. So if we draw the same harmonic oscillator in the garb of quantum mechanics, we could draw something like this. You have a potential energy curve. This axis again is energy, and this curve is u of x. But now all possible values of energy, all values of energy are not possible. The energy can only go up in quantized steps. So you have quantized energy levels or discrete energy levels. Now a harmonic oscillator, a mass attached to a spring that you see in your lab, is a macroscopic object. It's a large object. So it follows the classical picture that we've drawn, more or less. But an atom that is bound to a nucleus. So you have a nucleus and an electron, and there is attraction between the electron and the nucleus. This can be modeled by a harmonic oscillator in which the electron is bound to the nucleus, or you have a diatomic molecule in which two atoms are bound together. So this is a diatomic molecule. This can also be modeled like a harmonic oscillator. Remember our first or second class. So these microscopic objects, these tiny objects, obey the quantization of energy rule. So even though this is the potential energy curve, the energy levels on this curve have to be discrete. So all values of energy are not possible like the shaded region we drew there. Only discrete levels are possible, like this. And so on. And these levels are identified by certain quantum numbers. So, and the quantum numbers are denoted by n. So this is n equals 1. This is the n equals 1 level, the n equals 2 level, the n equals 3 level, 4 level, 5 level, 6 level, and so on. And this is the ground state or the ground energy level. It has a certain energy. Let's call it E naught. And the next energy level is higher than E naught. So it's E naught plus something. And the next energy level is yet higher. And for this harmonic oscillator, these energy levels are equally spaced. Alright? So, and this spacing turns out to be equal to h bar omega naught, where h bar is defined as h over 2 pi. So the first excited state is at an energy E naught plus h bar omega. The second one is at the energy E naught plus 2h bar omega. This is at E naught plus 3h bar omega, and so on. And this lowest energy actually is never equal to 0. This has some finite value. It's a very important point in quantum mechanics. The lowest energy is not equal to 0. This energy is in fact equal to half h bar omega. Alright, so could you write for me a relationship between En and N.
यार बिल्कुल नहीं चल रहा, मेरा गलत थक गया बोल बोल के. हेलो हेलो. तो नहीं ना, वो बैटरी बदलो उसकी. किस तरह फिर उसको.
N plus half.
Half plus n minus 1 h bar omega.
Right, what is E naught?
Sir, where does that energy come from? Where is it?
चलिए.
So En is n plus half h bar omega naught, correct?
So for the first case, it will be 1.5 h cut omega.
All right.
Yes, sir, it's n minus 1.
It's n minus half. So if we start from n equals 1, let's start from n equals 0. Let's start from n equals 0. That's the convention. Right? So this is the convention. This is the ground state. N equals 0 has an energy E naught, which is half h bar omega naught, and this is the relationship between energy and N. We had a relationship for the hydrogen atom. This is a relationship for a harmonic oscillator. Now, if an electron is at the n equals 3 level, how many possible ways can it come down in? Three ways. So one possibility is that it comes down here, then it comes down here, then it comes down here. The other possibility is that it comes down here and then makes a transition directly to here. The third possibility is that it comes down here and makes a transition here. And the fourth possibility is that it makes a direct transition to the ground state. So there are different ways in which the electron can come down. In each of these ways, it will emit 3 photons, each of the same energy. And that energy will be h bar omega naught, the spacing between these levels. In this case, it will emit 2 photons. 1 photon of energy h bar omega naught and 1 photon of energy 2h bar omega naught, and so on. So this quantized harmonic oscillator has several interesting properties. The first property is that the ground energy, the ground state energy, is not zero. This is called the 0 point energy. And the ground state energy in quantum mechanics can never be equal to 0. Because we know that the energy corresponds to the amplitude. And if A becomes equal to 0, it means that the harmonic oscillator is at rest. whatever system we're talking about, the electron, the proton, the neutron, whatever system we're talking about is effectively at rest. So that's the meaning of zero energy. But that is not possible by virtue of the uncertainty principle. Nothing can be at rest. Everything has some frothing, jostling motion, even if the temperature is 0 kelvins. Even at absolute zero, there is some residual energy, which means that vacuum, if you're far away from any star, you are not seeing the gravitational pull of any star, of any galaxy, you're very far off, you're in perfect vacuum. Even in perfect vacuum, there is some energy, which is the 0 point energy of vacuum. So the minimal energy of any system cannot be equal to zero, and this is totally contrary to the classical conception. You can have a mass attached to a spring, and this mass is at rest. And when it is at rest, A will be equal to 0. And the total energy will be equal to 0. But this is not possible for a quantum system. Even if it were at 0 kelvins, it will still have some residual motion. So if you have a solid which is comprised of many harmonic oscillators coupled with one another, network of harmonic oscillators, at absolute zero, there will still be some residual motion. You cannot freeze out the motion to nihilo. You cannot make it zero. Alright, so this is the ideal harmonic oscillator, the quantum version of the harmonic oscillator. But we've already looked at variants of the harmonic oscillator. For example, if I draw R here, energy here, and I look at the case of two atoms coming close to one another, the approach of two atoms. Then we've already drew the potential energy curve for such a system. It looks like this. So in the this is R naught, the equilibrium distance between, or the most favorable distance between the atoms where there is no force acting on the system, because the derivative of this curve gives you the force, correct? Do you agree with me on that? Because the force is actually equal to minus du by dr. So you differentiate this, you find the slope of this curve at different points. You can actually find the slope. Here the force. Here the force is 0 because the slope is 0. So this is the most probable distance between these atoms where the forces are 0. Now in this small, in the region close to R naught, we have an approximation of an ideal harmonic oscillator. Right? And this is something we drew in the previous class. Here we have a good approximation of the ideal harmonic oscillator. So this is the ideal harmonic oscillator, and this is the real potential energy curve. So even in this case in which two atoms are approaching one another, the energy levels have to be quantized in the true spirit of quantum mechanics. So we can draw the quantized energy levels totally in similarity, analogously to what we've drawn for the harmonic oscillator case. So the energy levels will be quantized in this case as well. So here we have a good approximation of a harmonic oscillator. So the energy levels are equally spaced. But as you go above, as you go to longer lengths, the potential energy curve becomes asymmetric. The harmonic oscillator curve is totally symmetric, it's parabolic. But this curve is not symmetric. So this equal spacing rule breaks down. So you get lines, energy levels that get closer and closer together. So you asymptotically, the energy levels get closer and closer together, and at this datum line, above this datum line, the energy becomes quantized, continuous, because now the two atoms are free. The atoms are not interacting with one another because the distances become so large. So this is the datum line. So we have a potential energy curve for a harmonic oscillator. We have a potential energy curve for two atoms approaching one another. And before we end the class, let's draw the potential energy curve for an electron that is seeing a nucleus. What happens inside a hydrogen atom? Alright, so be very attentive. Excuse me. Inside the hydrogen atom, we have a nucleus. A very simplistic picture. And the nucleus has a charge. It's a single proton. Let's call this charge plus E. And we have an electron. And it has a charge minus E. Now there is some force of attraction between the electron and the proton. Could anyone tell me what this force would be? Electrostatic. And what's the value of this force? Right. You know the Coulomb's law. This force is K, which is 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught E square over R squared. This is the magnitude of the force. So what we would like to do is find the potential energy of this electron when it is at a distance r from the nucleus. So if we talk about vectors, F equals minus 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught E square R squared. Now what we would like to do is we would like to calculate U of R. What is the potential energy of the electron at this point? First question. If this electron were very far away from the nucleus, so the nucleus is there and the electron is so far away that it does not effectively see the nucleus, what will its potential energy be? 0. We can take that as a reference point. The potential energy is 0. So when the electron is brought close to the nucleus, it does work because the nucleus is attracting the electron. The external agent doesn't do work, but the nucleus itself does work in bringing the electron close to the nucleus. So this potential energy can be found from the integral of F. So UR would be given by F dr dash, where R dash goes from infinity to R. That is the work done in bringing the electron from a distance infinity to a distance R is defined as the potential energy of this point. Alright? So if you perform this integration, which all of you should be able to do, you find a potential energy which is given by minus 1 over 4 pi epsilon naught E square over R. So this is the potential energy of an electron that is inside an atom. This is the third case we are considering. First we considered a harmonic oscillator, an ideal harmonic oscillator. Then we consider two atoms approaching one another, and this is a third example we are considering of a potential energy diagram. The potential energy for the nucleus electron system is given by this. Now on your notebooks, could you plot what the yellow curve would look like, which is analogous to those curves that we've drawn? How will UR look like versus R? Could you please plot it? नोटबुक नहीं है कुछ खत्म हो गई तीसरा तो नहीं होगा तो देखो उसको जो मैंने लिखा है वहां पे शाबाश वेरी गुड इट्स वेरी गुड
In this case, one, it's the attraction falls negative, a proton and an electron.
Sir, that graph shows that as R...
That's fine.
I was talking about that graph shows that if R approaches 0, energy approaches infinity. But in that case, how can a fusion reaction occur? It cannot happen till energy.
So when, after the class.
Sir, is this correct? Sir?
It's fine, perfect, very good. All right, so there are a large number of students who've actually drawn this curve. R, U of R, the energy, the potential energy is always negative, and R is always positive, as it should be, because this is a spherically symmetric situation. R is the distance from the nucleus, it's always positive. So this is positive, the right hand side is always negative, and the curve that you will draw actually looks like this. What is this curve called? Is it a parabola? It's a hyperbola. It's a hyperbola. So for very large R, the potential energy is 0, which means that the electron is outside the atom. The atom has been ionized. So when the atom is ionized, the potential energy is 0 of the electron. And when you come close to the nucleus, the potential energy goes down, because the electron is now feeling the attraction of the nucleus. It's easier for the electron to approach the nucleus. There is affinity between the electron and the nucleus. So this is the potential energy curve, and the energy levels inside the hydrogen atom for the electron, they are also quantized. So we can draw those quantized energy levels on this curve as well, and those energy levels start from here, from minus 13.6 electron volts, and then this get closer and closer together. So this is the lowest energy state, or the ground state. It also has a quantum number n, which in this case starts from 1. This is n equals 2. The first excited state. This is n equals 3, and so on. And the relationship between the energy and n is given by minus 13.6 over n squared in electron volts. And the hydrogen spectrum that we saw the other day, yesterday that is, on the spectrometer we saw transitions that ended at the level n equals 2. For example, we saw a transition corresponding, a line corresponding to this transition, a line corresponding to this transition, and a line corresponding to this transition. So transitions that end up at n equals 2 in the hydrogen atom, they are called the Balmer transitions. And this is what we were able to see in the spectrum yesterday, because these happen to lie in the visible range. If we had a spectrometer that could detect wavelengths in the ultraviolet range, we could also see transitions that would end up in n equals 1. So what I've tried today is to give you examples of various kinds of potential energy curves and draw energy levels superimposed on these curves, and inshallah we'll continue with our discussion on Tuesday. Thank you.